are and how they were articulated. So then we then felt that we needed to find a way for people to be able to navigate it in a more intuitive way. And so we then created a website at selarts.org. And here you see that we've laid out the artistic processes across the top and the SEL competencies along the side, just like you saw in the matrix. And so this is what it looks like a little up close. And then you can click on the area like create and self-awareness, and it will bring you to this area that now gives you the EUs and the EQs that have been written for this area. So in the area of creating and self-awareness, we're looking at how, from an SEL standpoint, how to recognizing one's feelings and thoughts. Well, how does that then connect to the creative process? So the enduring understanding is one's feelings, thoughts, personal traits, strengths, and challenges influences the creative process, right? Making it clear that we can't divorce the way someone's background, someone's feelings, someone's experiences from what they bring to the creative process, right? So that's the point there. And then recognizing the impact of one's feelings and thoughts on the creative process, which gives us our essential question, which is, how does the awareness of one's strengths, challenges, feelings, and thoughts influence the generation of creative ideas? That's the intersection. And if you know that that is the intersection, then as you're working on curriculum, as you're working on lesson plans, you can begin to incorporate that. You can begin to be intentional about recognizing that that is there and then looking at how to activate it. And then you
let me interrupt you just a second. Yep. And that would be that there are also many people in here that are, you often throughout your nonprofit organization that you're working on grants. This is great information when you want to do something, because it gives you, other than we're going to do some SEL work, this gets you down in some nitty gritty when you're designing activities for kids that you're bringing into your nonprofit and things that you're writing grants for. This is really going to give you a leg up on, you know, what you're talking about. And I'm going to ask Phyllis Paisley to hold me accountable for, we'll get some of these links and we'll send them out to you in an email so that you can look at these in greater detail than what he's presenting. Right now he's presenting an idea and a concept, but I'm telling you, this is stuff a lot of you need and should be able to use with your grant writing. Thank you.
So then you'll notice like the little eye over top of each of the anchor standards. If you click on that, that will reveal what was the original EUs and EQs for that area. So you can see how they've been modified for this. And then on the SEL subcompetencies, you see these little bubbles, the EE, LE, MS, and HS. And I'll show you that in a second, but underneath that is the actual grade level indicators, because what's expected of an early elementary student to recognize one's feelings and thoughts is different than what's expected at the high school level. And I'll show you that in a second. So if you click on this, it'll bring you down just to that particular intersection. And we are beginning to populate sample lesson plans that address specifically a particular intersection. So here we're putting in lessons that relate to self-awareness and create. And you can see that we show what particular artistic discipline it is for and what particular grade level when you click on it. And like I said, when you click on the grade level indicators in the circles, this gives you the ability to look at what are the grade level indicators. So when we talked about, recognize one's feelings and thoughts, early elementary, recognize and name different types of positive and negative emotions, then get to the high school and it's like analyze how one's own thoughts and emotions affect decision-making and responsible behavior. So much more sophisticated, much more mature. And when you're writing curriculum, when you're developing lesson plans, you want to be able to understand what is age appropriate when you're trying to bring together both the artistic process and the social emotional learning competency. Again, this is at selarts.org. I will make sure that Roger has links to everything that I'm talking about here today, including some of the reports, the research reports that I've referenced so that you have them. A colleague of mine, Dr. Scott Egger, who literally wrote the book on social emotional learning and music education, actually has written 3 books on the topic. We put together this flyer on how to utilize social emotional learning to advocate for music education. This was designed specifically for music educators, but it talks you through how you can talk about it. And one of the reasons why we developed the framework was not only to assist our arts educators and arts administrators in developing curriculum and writing lesson plans, but so that they could then have intelligent conversations with their administrators, about this is where these intersections are. This is real work that we have done, and this is the real way that we can have a positive impact on social emotional learning. So it was done equal parts to assist arts educators, but also as a tool for arts educators to be able to educate their administrators. Additionally, and I'll give a link to this to Roger, there's an article that I wrote with Dr. Maurice Elias, who is one of the founding fathers of social emotional learning in the United States. We did an article for the New Jersey School Boards Association. They had a special issue on the importance of social emotional learning. And we were talking about SEL and arts education as a secret weapon and a superpower for our schools. So I think it's a great resource that I think would be useful to all of you and your work. And then also I will give to Roger a PDF of, this is Scott's new book that he's coming out with this spring, which is actually a series of case studies with more than a dozen music educators on how they are implementing this in the real world and how they are doing it in their practice. So what I'm going to do is I've actually got the foreword and a chapter, one of the first chapters in there in a PDF that you can take a look at. I think you will find it very informative, because that first chapter actually addresses kind of the next thing that we're going to talk briefly about, which is SEL as a lever for equity and social justice. There's a lot of conversation about how do we address these issues in our schools, and certainly then, how is it that we may address it through arts education? Well, SEL is a lever for equity and social justice. The way that Castle has been looking at it is that SEL advances educational equity and excellence through authentic school, family, community partnerships to establish learning environments and experiences that feature trusting and collaborative relationships, rigorous and meaningful curriculum instruction, and ongoing evaluation, as well as the fact that SEL can help address the various forms of inequity and empower young people and adults to co-create thriving schools and contribute to safe, healthy, and just communities. And when we want to think about it in terms of, like we talked about before, about self, others, and responsible decision making, well, through the lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, self really is about identity, about a student being able to address their own identity. Others is really about having a sense of belonging, where do I fit in? And then decision making, also translates into agency. How do I take ownership of the situation? And how do I, as an individual, have the power to create change and have influence over my circumstances? So self, others, decisions aligns with identity, belonging, and agency. And I think that it's important to recognize this, because identity, belonging, and agency really are a lot of the things that folks are talking about as it relates to being able to address diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so you're going to be seeing a lot and hearing a lot more about the intersection of arts education, SEL, and diversity, equity, inclusion. And it's certainly influenced by some of the conversations around culturally relevant pedagogy in the classroom and items of that nature. So, as I mentioned, it's got to be embedded, has to be intentional, and it has to be sustained in order for it to be effective. And I'll leave this portion of the presentation with this quote from Dr. Elias, who said, "I believe everyone will soon come to realize that our arts educators are the secret weapon to implementation of social emotional learning in our schools. Arts educators are a secret weapon with superpowers, according to Maurice. So one last thing before I open it up to questions and a conversation. And I think this is important because it's related. There's a lot of talk about learning loss right now. That students have lost time, they've lost years, they've lost, that they're going to be behind in so many areas. How do we make up for it? And I think that this has a direct relationship to how we address the social emotional learning needs of our students. Because learning loss is really a deficit mentality, a deficit approach to the issue. Because learning has been disrupted, right? No question about it. Learning has been delayed, but learning has not been lost. We didn't lose learning, right? It's just been delayed. It was different. It was disrupted. And there are certainly students have not made the progress necessarily that people would have wanted to have them to make in this period of time, but the learning is not lost, it's delayed. So the question becomes, well, how do we address that? But in learning loss, there's this, kind of this whole deficit mentality and the idea of we need to send our students into remediation, which I think is really dangerous. But I also want to share with you some of the predictions that people made about learning loss, right? So there's the Northwest Evaluation Association has this thing called the Measures of Academic Progress.
This is she.
Hello. Someone mute.
Yeah.
Someone's on the phone. There we go. The Northwest Evaluation Association, their Measures of Academic Progress, or MAP. They came out with their predictions last summer. They predicted students would start the school year having lost a third of a year in reading and a half of a year at math, right? Pretty significant. And then Credo at Stanford University came out and predicted that the average student lost 136 to 232 days of learning in math, depending on the state. Okay, 232 days. And that's based on being out of school for 60 days, right? So for every day they were out of school, they basically lost 4 days of learning in math. Kind of doesn't make a lot of sense to me. At least from my standpoint, the math doesn't add up, right? So they also, their projections relied on the assumption that students learned nothing or worse once schools shut their doors. So ever since schools were shut down, you all haven't been doing anything. There's been no learning going on. There's been no teaching going on. Our kids are just sitting around doing nothing. That's the assumption. So, and a lot of places are citing this research. They're not citing the findings, they're citing the projections. Oh my God, there's going to be all this learning loss. It's going to be devastating, right? So the results, the MAP results came out and they basically did testing in September of 2020, grades 3 through 8, compared it to the tests from 2019. And it showed that students performed similarly on both tests in reading, and that math was only off by about 5 to 10 percentage points lower. Not a third of a year, not a half a year, right? Similarly in both tests. And additionally, all grades since the beginning of the pandemic, most students made some learning gains in both reading and math, right? So they made gains. They didn't lose anything. So the Credo report, well, guess what? They did not even release their findings. I mean, probably because their initial claims were so absurd that whatever their research finding was going to be, they didn't have anything that it was just going to be embarrassment. So they never released their findings, oddly enough. But this is the type of information that we need to be aware of. And we also have to recognize that learning delay has occurred in the arts. When people are talking about learning loss, you need to probe them really quickly. It's just like, okay, you mean learning loss across all content areas, right? Right? And usually, well, we mean language arts, literacy, and math. I'm like, but there's been learning loss in other areas as well, hasn't there been? So this whole idea of learning loss and focus on language arts, literacy, and math has led us into this situation where you either look at this from an abundance mentality or a deficit mentality. And the abundance mentality is, how do we accelerate learning? What do we need to do to help our students catch up without turning it into remediation? Because accelerate is better than remediate. And we know in the arts that remediation never ends well for us, right? Because remediation means that they're going to bring students back to school and they're going to give them more time, which means they're going to take time away from something else. And where does it usually come from? Arts education. So from a social emotional learning standpoint, we've decided that we're going to bring our kids back to school. We're going to use remediation strategies that then, after a year of not having the things that define them, the things that they love the most, their student activities, their athletics, their performing arts, their visual arts, the things that their kids can't wait to be able to do when they get back into the school, we're going to bring them into school and go, you know what, you can't have that. We're going to take that away because we're going to give them more of the stuff that they don't want. We're going to give them more language arts history, we're going to give them more math, and we're going to take these things away. That is a recipe for disaster. For disaster. It's going to push our students away in droves. We have to recognize that the trauma that our students have gone through over the past year. We have to recognize the loss that they have felt in the things that mean something to them. And a lot of them aren't mourning the loss of time in math, but they are mourning the loss of time in their activities and in their arts programs. You see, our students will not learn until they feel safe and until they feel valued. And if we open up our schools and don't recognize this and just say, oh, we got to make up for lost time in remediation, we are going to do a terrible disservice to our students and a terrible disservice to this generation of young adults that we're responsible for developing. I will just leave you with this, give you a little preview. Next week, Arts Ed New Jersey, we're actually launching our new Center for Arts Education and Social Emotional Learning. We've been working on this for about a year, and it's going to be a national center to focus on collecting and curating all the information and resources regarding the intersection of arts education and social emotional learning. And we will also be conducting new research in the area of this particular intersection. Additionally, next Wednesday, we will be part of a congressional briefing that's being hosted by US Senator John Tester, who just happens to be a former band director. So we're going to be doing a congressional briefing next Wednesday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'll make sure Roger has a link to that so that if you're interested in participating or watching it, you can sign up for it. It's going to include Scott Edgar, myself, Pamela Randall Garner from Castle will be joining us, Uriel Lashley from the University of Wisconsin, where he's doing some phenomenal work around equity, arts education, and SEL. And one of Scott's co-authors on the new book, Darlene, who is a K through 6 teacher out in California, talking about how she implements SEL in the classroom. So that's going to be a great opportunity for you to hear from other experts and so learn some more as part of that congressional briefing. And like I said, the new center will be opening next week. The URL is Arts Ed SEL. That's kind of what we're calling the place, artsedsel.org. And so be sure to stop by next week as we open up all of the resources and information and tools to help you be able to be effective in the implementation of SEL-informed arts instruction. The last thing that I'll leave you with is that a well-rounded education is not only for when it's convenient. And I know that in this whole environment around COVID-19, that some of our districts have cut corners. Some of them have done things that people have looked the other way, utilizing arts educators as, extra back help, paraprofessionals, room monitors, and then forcing them to teach remotely if they were in a hybrid model. We're not giving them as much time or commandeering art spaces. And as we come back into school, we need to make sure that a well-rounded education is a priority for our students. And that includes the place of arts education in the lives of our students and in their educational process as well. So I think it's now the time to begin reminding people that our educational expectations still remain high for our students. It still is centered around a well-rounded education, and that needs to be a priority as we bring them back. And by paying attention to a well-rounded education, we will be addressing the social emotional learning needs of our students at the same time. So with that, I will stop the presentation and we can have a conversation, and I'll answer any questions that you may have.